The latest tech.
People love iPhone, and it's an important part of our daily lives.
Interviews.
You see far too many products that come on the market that you look at that you say, was a blind person ever even consulted for something like this?
Accessibility.
The most interesting thing over the last couple of years is the emphasis on gaming and accessibility.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to the show. I am Marc Aflalo.
And I am Stephen Scott. Now, Mark, with Mother's Day just around the corner, we wanted to do something a little special for the audience.
Oh, did you get them all gifts?
Well, if you're referring to our show as a gift, then absolutely. All joking aside, though, we tend to focus on things like, what to get your mum or what your kids should get you if you're a mother, but not today. Instead, today we're going to be introducing you to a mum who we first discovered on the AMI original series We Are One.
You see, Stephen, Dawn Pickering, our guest this week, was featured on a show a couple years back with her son Ollie, who is blind. Ollie is a cancer survivor diagnosed with large cell lymphoma at the age of 7, which resulted him in becoming legally blind. And while that show, which we can find now on YouTube or with the AMI TV app, focused on their story from a family perspective, we thought it would be fun to catch up with Dawn and hear about how technology may have helped them throughout the journey.
Well, Dawn Pickering is here with us today. Welcome to the show and happy Mother's Day, Dawn.
Thank you. I'm excited that Mother's Day is here.
Dawn, I told a little bit about your story, but why don't you catch us up from your perspective?
Great. Well, in a nutshell, Ollie was diagnosed with a rare cancer called anaplastic large cell lymphoma in November of 2019 when he was 7 years old. And after a couple rounds of chemo, unfortunately, he relapsed in his central nervous system, in his brain and his spine, essentially through his cerebrospinal fluid. And the lymphoma got in there and damaged his optic nerves, causing him to go blind during his first of 2 brain relapses. And after the first relapse, he requires stem cell transplant, in addition to, much more chemo and what have you to try and get him back into remission to prepare for stem cell transplant. And that was right around the time, unfortunately, when the pandemic was sort of landing, at least here in Canada. I think we were a little behind parts of Europe, but it was landing here in March of 2020 at the time when we were supposed to go for stem cell transplant. So while we had 3 perfect matches on the stem cell registry, and we felt like we'd won the lottery, we also got a call from the hospital for sick kids in Toronto where he was going to have transplant. And they said, look, this pandemic thing is changing everything, and we can't guarantee that we'll be able to get the stem cells because they're coming, internationally. And if you recall, the flights were downed, and there was a lot of uncertainty around that time. And they were also worried that if they gave stem cells, to a kid whose immune system they had basically killed, and prepped for transplant, they really didn't know what would happen if they gave him cells that might come from a donor who had COVID. Because as you recall, we didn't really know much about COVID in the beginning. So, so all those things were at play. And so they decided that our daughter, who was 11 at the time and was a half match, would be his best chance for the stem cell transplant and its survival. So that was the context that we, sort of left, for transplant in the very first week of lockdown here in Ontario and in Canada, as we drove to Toronto with a lot of fear and a lot of hope. For us, we were lucky enough that after a one false start, unfortunately, he relapsed before he could get his sister's cells. And we had to get him back into remission a second time before we could actually get to transplant in July of 2020. And since then, everything has been great. But obviously, we've had to do a lot of work to transition, to sort of getting used to the blindness and figure out, how to navigate his whole world, blind, learning Braille, and obviously, working with a mobility cane and all the daily living skills that it takes to be successful as a blind or low vision person.
Dawn, I don't want people at home worrying about Ollie because he is doing quite well now, right?
He's phenomenally well. He's fantastic, and he's almost 11 years old, and he has adapted so well to the blindness. He really is thriving. So we're so lucky. His vision itinerant teacher tells us on a regular basis that she's rarely seen sort of a kid, sort of take to Braille and learning the daily living skills and his mobility cane usage and so on, all of his orientation and mobility, teaching. He just embraces it.
That's amazing. Now, prior to all of this, had you had any experience working with the CNIB or the low vision community at large?
I did personally have the opportunity. I had two colleagues at work actually who had vision loss. One who was completely blind and used a guide dog, and the other who, interestingly enough, she was a fairly young woman in her sort of 30s when I met her, early 30s. And she had been born with some vision loss, and it had progressed over time, so it had gotten worse for her. But she didn't use a white mobility cane, and she did have some accommodation at work, and I happened to end up managing her. And so I sort of had a really great conversation with her from the outset where I said, look, I'm going to tell you, I don't really understand all that much about any of this, right? I'm certainly no expert, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that might seem really dumb, right? So I really need your help to understand this because I want to make sure that I get you every resource that you need, right? And she was really easygoing, and she was like, oh, I'm good. I have big screens and da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, but do you have the right readers? And do you have I was starting to do some research to try and figure out what she would sort of need. And so she helped me along the path, but her attitude was very much like, it's okay, I'll use whatever they give me. And my attitude as her new manager, especially in public service, was, no, we have a duty to accommodate, right? It's our job to accommodate you. So you have to tell us what you need, not what you think you can live with, right? So, and she said to me afterwards, which was kind of comical, she said, you're the only manager I've ever had who ever, sort of tried so hard to get me all these resources in a fight. So I think, I believe everything in the universe is connected in some way. I think Maya was sort of sent into my path for me to sort of learn a little bit more about it and understand, some of the challenges that a person with vision loss has, and how we can overcome those things, right? And how attitudes have to change, I think, often for us to be able to help people the best way we can.
Dawn, we are just scraping the surface, so please don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick break, and we come back. I want to ask you about technology. This is Double Tap TV. We'll be right back.
You're watching Double Tap TV. Get involved. Follow us at Double Tap On Air or email us feedback@doubletaponair.com. Double Tap TV will be right back. You're watching Double Tap TV.
Back on Double Tap TV with Dawn Pickering, mother of Ollie, who we're meeting through your lens, Dawn.
Now, Dawn, how did technology impact you going through this journey with Ollie?
That's a really great question. So we're still learning a lot about technology, and every day, so we look at options, for him that might help him. But I got to say, it's interesting. We've watched him progress from using the Perkins Brailler, for example, which still technically is technology, albeit, pretty old technology now, or the basis of today's technology. He's now starting to work with, an iPhone. He's fairly young, but, we've kind of looked at it and sort of said, okay, there's some value there for him to sort of learn about these things. And I sit on the board of the Ontario Parents of Visually Impaired Children, and our chair there, David Lepofsky, is awesome. He's a blind lawyer who also happens to have a child who has vision loss. And, he's given me some great tips too, right? So look, we're looking at, OrCam and all these other, sort of different technologies and such. And then he's like, well, go get yourself a pair of Sony glasses and then, use this technology on your phone and da-da-da. And so everybody that you meet has these great, sort of ideas, have, different apps that they use, and every bit of it is really helpful. The key will be for him as he ages to sort of choose what's going to work best for him, right? And I think that's the challenge, is when to introduce the technology, right? How much of it, to sort of allow him to use, and how much do you teach him versus let him try to figure out?
Dawn, I'm curious as a parent because I have a challenge, obviously, restricting screen time with my own kids. So how do you balance giving Ollie an iPhone, for example, to help with his blindness versus, his access to the internet, for example, and making sure that screen time is limited? Different challenges, I guess.
Well, it's ironic, I suppose, because one of the things that we always sort of hear about is the amount of screen time that's bad for your child. And I kind of laugh because I say, well, my child doesn't really get any screen time because he can't see a screen, right? So, I mean, truly, I guess maybe he's in a bit of a different scenario when it comes to his blindness, because it is pretty much, it's full blindness, right? He has a tiny bit of light vision in one eye, so it's really not enough for him to see anything on a screen. So most of his is actually audio, right? When you think about it, yes, he uses something that has video component, but it's really audio. And ironically, or interestingly, I suppose we don't often hear about how radio or, listening to things is bad for you. We hear about how you watching or viewing things is bad for you, for your brain and such. So I'm not sure that all the same things sort of apply to him with his level of vision loss as would for, another kid who might have some vision and be able to look at a screen.
What have his experiences been at school with friends, administrators, and teachers?
In school, Teacher shows a video, right? Great. But Ollie has no context as to what is happening in the video. All he has is audio. So if you have audio description in that particular case, it will tell him, so the scene opens with, a school. In front of the school, there's a boy holding a guide dog, and he'll know that because the audio description tells him such. And it's the same for anything that he watches.
So you don't worry about how much he's using?
There are always drawbacks when it comes to technology, but as a child with vision loss, I don't really worry about the amount of technology that he's using, because honestly, as I say, the screen time really doesn't apply to him. So it would be no different if the technology is telling him something audible than I am, right?
Dawn, do these tools and tech give you hope for Ollie's future?
It absolutely does, right? I mean, when we think about it, it's interesting. My mother-in-law was here not long ago, and so she lives in Latin America. And, I think there's still a prevalent feeling there that, blindness is a terrible thing, right? And that, the person is broken and they will always have to rely on other people and they can't be independent and so on. And that was we had this really interesting conversation with her. She hadn't seen Ollie, sort of since he just post-transplant. And, she said, so he'll always be dependent on other people. And I said, well, aren't we all? Right? We're all dependent on other people, whether or not we have vision. That's, we all need people. We all need help with something. So, I think what it does do for him is it creates this world where, especially in a working context, right? As he gets older and he is able to take on jobs and do things, he can do so much more than he could before. And I'll give you an example. So he's only 10, but in the school environment, he's in grade 5, and elementary schools in this area go up to grade 6, and then they go into a middle school. So he's, nearing the end, but he's in a split 5-6 class this year, and all grade 6 students get a job because they're trying to teach them responsibility, and, they're the big kids in this, small pond kind of thing. And so his class, the grade 6s, were getting jobs this year. And Ollie and a couple of his grade 5 friends in the class piped up and said, well, how come we don't get to get jobs? And the teacher kind of looked at them and was like, well, okay, do we dissuade the kid from wanting to take responsibility? I guess not. Sure, you can have a job. And so when asked what he wanted to do out of all the jobs, the thing that Ollie wanted to do was work in the office at lunchtime and answer phones, right? And sort of help with kids coming in who needed help or whatever. So the teachers are taking lunch. They're right across the hallway, of course, not like they're ever gone from the school. But, the grade 6s take care of the office. And so he wanted to do this. And his principal, I think, was kind of dubious about it. She wasn't sure how it could work for a blind kid to kind of take care of the office, right, while they were gone doing this. And so Ollie and one of his sighted friends sort of worked this out. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do, right? And they went in and, learned the phones, both of them, and they put some bump dots on the phones. It was okay with the office manager to do that. And, Ollie knew from his daily living skills courses that, all the keypads for the numbers for telephones are in fact the same. And typically there's a dot right in the middle. And so he knows how to sort of, go ahead and phone or type out the numbers that are necessary. And so they put bump dots on the pause buttons and all those various things. And then they brailled out a script for him when he answers the phones and so on. And so they did all these things sort of together, some of it using technologies and some of it, sort of just on their own. And then they said to the principal, here's how we're going to do it. So two, 10-year-olds basically saying, here's how we're going to make this work so that Ollie can work in this office. And I think that was really fantastic because, the principal's lovely, don't get me wrong, but she has, her natural sort of, I think, stigmas and whatever, that we all sort of carry with us from, our experiences or lack thereof. And so she really didn't see a way that he could make it work. And the two of them made it work. And she let them try it. It went well. And actually now sometimes Ben can't even be there right at the same time as Ollie is. And so Ollie's still answering the phones and taking care of the office on his own. And so imagine people's reaction when they come into the office at lunchtime and it's the blind kid who is running the office.
That's just awesome. Okay, it's time for another break, so everybody stick around. When we come back, we're going to continue celebrating a mother, Dawn Pickering, this week as we celebrate Mother's Day here on this Mother's Day edition of Double Tap TV.
Can't get enough Double Tap TV? Subscribe to the podcast and get your fill of Double Tap every day. Visit doubletaponair.com and follow us now. Double Tap TV will be right back. You're watching watching Double Tap TV.
Back on the show with our guest this week, Dawn Pickering.
Now, Dawn, are there any technologies that you've discovered that have changed your life because of Ollie?
There's definitely a lot of room for the technology, in our world. I think that much like any kind of AI, we have to sort of teach it to become more intelligent, right? So there are some limitations to it, but it is definitely opening up his world in ways that we couldn't possibly have imagined. And even, I've added the app on my own phone called Be Your Eyes, right? And I'm not sure if you guys use it in Europe, but certainly here in Canada, the way you guys are using it, so you know what I'm talking about. To have the ability to be a volunteer, now that I know what I know, if my son, if somebody calls me and they're somewhere and they need me to look at something, hey, is my ground beef cooked, right? It's a good question, right? Something I never thought about before. Like, how would my son cooking ground beef with no vision know whether or not his meat is actually cooked? It's not like there's another way right now that you would know, right, without getting some kind of feedback. And if you live alone, how do you do those types of things? So that kind of technology, I think, is really opening everyone's world up and causing some really positive things to happen.
Dawn, I want to take you back to that time because you mentioned at the beginning of the show, you talked about being on the trip to the hospital. You had a real mix of fear and hope. And I think we all know what you mean by that, right? You were fearful of what was coming, but you were also hopeful of what could come out of this, what could emerge, that things would only get better. Do you have a fear today for Ollie? And what hope do you have? What's changed essentially since then and now?
I definitely have fear for Ollie in lots of ways. Most of those are medical, right? And also some fears around, as he gets ready to go to middle school, we've been starting to talk about it, right? I mean, we're getting near the end of his grade 5 year. He's got 1 year left. We have to make some choices about where he's going to go. And I was just talking to his vision itinerant teacher yesterday. And I said to her, I'm not worried about him having support from his vision itinerant team because I know she'll be there or, others that are trained like her. I worry about going from the community that we're in, which has been so supportive, right? Partly, or maybe in large part because they saw him go through cancer, right? And understood how hard he's had to work to, first live and then to overcome, some of the barriers that are there for a child with disability. And so I worry going into this next community where they don't have the same context, the same understanding, right, of how hard he's worked and how much he's overcome, that the inclusion part of it, for example, might be more difficult. Now, I have hope because we have literally ingrained in Ollie this idea that he is more capable than the average sighted person, not less, right? And he is in no way broken because he has to work harder and, he is able to do more with less than anybody I know, right? So I do have a lot of hope, but, and I have hope that, the cool thing is Ollie is, learning to advocate for himself really early on. And maybe this goes to your earlier point, Mark, right? The kids who are younger, when this happens to them, they adapt maybe, more easily because I think they understand the need to sort of stand up for themselves and to sort of go, well, this is just who I am, right? And this is what we're going to do. This is how you have to accommodate me. This is what I need. And they're not afraid to speak up. And so that's what we teach them every day is, nobody's going to understand around you naturally your blindness. They don't live in it every day. They don't think about it. Even his sister, who, I know does live with it every day, still forgets. She comes in the front door, she throws her backpack in the front entrance, and Ollie just tripped over it yesterday. He got really upset. So, I think that it's not intuitive for others, right? So I tell him we constantly have to go out and we have to educate and we have to tell people, and you can't be afraid to tell people what you need. So I have hope that part of Ollie, the very confident part of Ollie that is not afraid to speak up for what he needs, will continue to do that. And at the same time, obviously, as he transitions into those teen years, I have a little bit of fear that he'll become a typical teenager and not want to stick out from the crowd and not want to be seen as different. So, I say to him, you're different, but not, right? Like, that's the reality. You are different. You have to accept that you have these situations that are going to be more challenging for you, but it doesn't mean you can't do what everybody else does.
Dawn, thank you so much for helping us to celebrate Mother's Day with your story.
You know what? It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, as always, and I'm always grateful for all the work that you guys do and to, see some of the technologies that are evolving. I keep watching because I think there's always something new for us to learn.
Dawn Pickering there. Mark, as we celebrate yet another incredible story here on Double Tap TV.
Stephen, we don't always have time for everything that we might get to when we actually record some of these interviews. And something you didn't hear on the show today was that because of Ollie being 7 when all this happened, that played a major role in his attitude to date, because when you're young, you don't think about the future as much. You don't think about things like insurance and how this affects life and how this affects, when you're 40 years old. So that naivete really sometimes is a blessing in disguise for a young kid like that.
Oh, absolutely. As someone who grew up with visual impairment and someone who lived my entire life with low vision, it's something that you learn to live with, and, the challenges that come with it kind of bounce off you a lot more as a child. As an adult, my experience has been quite different. So, I think for Ollie, he's in a great place technically. Technology today is in such great shape for him growing up that he can benefit from and use all these tools to make his life easier. That, his life, I imagine, will be much more positive than a lot of people who, like me, grew up, 30 years ago with, a typewriter and hope.
I look forward to doing the show, for the next long time, hopefully, so we can catch up with Ollie and get him on the show himself.
Yeah, that'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Just to find out how he got on. Let's talk to Ollie in 20 years. That means we have to stay on air for at least 20 years, okay?
Okay, let's work on that. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Thank you for watching this edition of Double Tap TV. Thank you to Dawn Pickering for being here this week. We will speak to you again on our next edition of Double Tap TV.
Thanks for watching Double Tap. Send us your feedback to feedback@doubletaponair.com. Leave us a voicemail at 1-877-803-4567. Hosted by Marc Aflalo in Montreal and Stephen Scott in Glasgow. Producer Marc Aflalo. Editing and graphics Jordan Steeves. Voiceover Anna Vicino. Social media Wendy KAUFMAN. Integrated Described Video Specialist M. Williams. Supervising Producer Michelle Dudas. Manager Programming AMI TV Lizanne Gagne. Director Content Development and Production Kara Nye. VP Content Development and Operations John Melville. President and CEO David Arrington. Copyright 2023 Accessible Media Inc.
An AMI original production.